The Russian sentence «Еще в юности Рюноsuke Акутагава определил для себя главную тему творчества» means, open quote, even in his youth, Ryunosuke Akutagawa determined or decided on the main theme of his creative work. Close quote. Breaking it down, «Еще в юности», even in his youth, already in his youth. Ryunosuke Akutagawa. Определил для себя, determined for himself. Decided for himself, главную тему творчества, the main theme of his creative work or writing. The phrase «бесконечная вселенная человеческого духа» is Russian and translates to the infinite universe of the human spirit in English. Here's a breakdown of the meaning. Бесконечная, infinite or endless. Вселенная, universe, человеческого духа, of the human spirit. So together, it expresses a poetic or The Russian phrase «тайны человеческой психологии» translates to the mysteries of human psychology or the secrets of human psychology in English. Let's break it down. Тайны, mysteries, человеческой, человеческой, human, genitive form meaning of human, психологии, psychology, genitive form meaning of psychology. The Russian sentence «материалы для большинства своих новелл писатель черпал из старинных хроник» means the writer drew material for most of his short stories from old chronicles. Breaking it down, материалы, material sources, or content. Для большинства своих новелл, for most of his novellas, short stories. Писатель, the writer. Черпал из, drew from, took from, derived from. Старинных хроник, old ancient chronicles or historical records. The Russian phrase «средневековых анекдотов и феодального эпоса» translates to medieval anecdotes and feudal epic in English. Here's a breakdown. Средневековых, medieval, literally, of the Middle Ages. Анекдотов, anecdotes, short, humorous, or interesting stories. And. Феодального эпоса, feudal epic, epic poetry or stories from the feudal era. The Russian phrase Akutagawa подчеркивал translates to Akutagawa emphasized or Akutagawa stressed in English. Breaking it down, Akutagawa, referring to the Japanese writer Yunosuke Akutagawa. Подчеркивал means emphasized, stressed, or underlined, past tense, masculine form. So the phrase is likely the start of a sentence such as, open quote, Akutagawa подчеркивал, что искусство должно отражать внутренний мир человека. Akutagawa emphasized that art should reflect the inner world of a person. Close quote. The Russian phrase «что психология человека мало меняется на протяжении веков» means that human psychology changes little over the centuries, or more naturally in English, open quote, that human psychology has changed little over the centuries, that the human mind hardly changes over time, close. The Russian phrase «и с тонким вкусом» means and with refined taste, or and with good taste. Let's break it down. Equals and with. Тонким вкусом is refined taste, delicate sense of taste. Literally, subtle taste. The Russian phrase неподдельным юмором translates to genuine humor or authentic humor in English. Let's break it down. Неподдельный literally means not fake, unfeigned, or sincere. Humor means humor. So together, the phrase «ярким литературным даром создавал свои бессмертные новеллы» can be translated and interpreted as follows. Ярким литературным даром, with a bright, luminous literary gift, or with a remarkable literary talent. Создавал created or was creating. Свои бессмертные новеллы, her immortal novellas stories, meaning stories that are timeless or classic. So the whole sentence essentially means, open quote, she created her immortal novellas with a remarkable literary talent. Close quote. It's a poetic way of praising The phrase "работы по проведению узкоколейки Адавара" is Russian and then translates roughly to works on constructing the Odawara narrow gauge railway, or construction works for the Odawara narrow gauge railway. Breaking it down, работы works or construction works, по проведению on conducting, implementing, constructing, узкоколейки narrow gauge railway, literally narrow gauge, Adavara, Odawara, likely referring to the Japanese city or a project named after it. So it likely refers to a project. The phrase "Atami nachalis" is Russian, but it seems incomplete or taken out of context. Let's break it down. Atami, this is likely the instrumental plural form of ata, if such a word is meant, but in standard Russian, ata isn't common. It could be a typo, a name, or part of a poetic literary text. Sometimes in old texts or poetry, ata can mean an attack or raid from Turkic influence, so atami could mean with attacks or by attacks. Nachilis means have started or began. So literally, atami nachilis, the attacks have begun, or possibly it started with attacks. The phrase "Когда Рехею было 8 лет" is Russian and translates to when Rekheyu was 8 years old. Когда, when. Рехею, when. A name in the dative case. Было, was. 8 лет, 8 years old. The Russian sentence "Рехей ежедневно ходил на окраину деревни глядеть на работы" translates to English as Rekhey went to the edge of the village every day to watch the work. Breaking it down, Rekhey, a personal name Rekhey, ежедневно, every day. Ходил, went or used to go, past tense, habitual action. На окраину деревни, to the outskirts, edge of the village. Глядеть на работы, to watch the work, or to look at the work. It suggests that Rekhey had a daily routine. The phrase "вернее не на работы" is in Russian. Let's break it down carefully. Вернее, literally, more precisely, or rather. It's used when correcting or refining what was just said. Не на работы, literally, not to work or not for work. So the whole phrase "вернее не на работы" can be translated as, or rather, not for work, or more precisely, not to work. The phrase "А то, как перевозят землю в вагонетках" is Russian and can be translated literally as open quote, and at how they transport the soil in small carts, close quote. Breaking it down, "А то," and at that, and as for that, regarding that, "как," how, перевозят, they transport, they carry, землю, soil, earth, вагонетках, in small carts, typically little mine or construction carts like trolley cars. The Russian phrase "вот на что он засматривался" can be translated literally as, open quote, "that's what he was staring at," or "that's what he was gazing at," close quote. Вот, this here, emphasizes what follows, like this is it. На что, at what. Он equals he. Засматривался, past tense, засматриваться, which means to stare at or to gaze at, usually with interest or admiration. The phrase "na vagonetku" is Russian and literally translates to onto the mine cart or get on the cart in English. Vagonetka, was a small cart, typically used in mines, factories, or construction to carry materials. N equals onto or on. So depending on context, it could be a literal instruction to get. The phrase "груженную землею" is in Russian and is in the instrumental case, meaning loaded with soil, earth, or laden with earth. Груженную, past participle of грузить, to load, meaning loaded. Землею, instrumental form of земля, earth, soil, land. So it literally describes something. The Russian phrase "Сзади становились двое землекопов" literally translates to two diggers stood behind, us, me. Breaking it down, "Сзади," behind. Становились were standing or stood, imperfective suggesting the action was happening. Двое, two, used with masculine or mixed gender plural nouns. Землекопов, diggers or excavators, people who dig, from землекоп. So contextually, it describes two people who dig standing behind someone. Depending on the context, it could be literal. The Russian phrase "Поскольку вагонетка шла под уклон" translates to "since the minecart was going downhill" or "because the minecart was going downhill." Breaking it down, "поскольку" since or because gives a reason for something. Вагонетка minecart or small cart on rails. Шла, past tense of go or move, feminine singular, referring to вагонетка. Под уклон, downhill or on a slope. So the sentence sets up a cause. The minecart is moving downhill, implying something follows from that fact. If you want, I can also explain the nuance of поскольку. The Russian phrase "она катилась сама" literally translates to "it rolled by itself," or "she rolled by herself" in English, depending on context. Она, she, it. Катилась, rolled, was rolling, past tentive. Сама, herself, by itself. So the sentence emphasizes that the rolling happened without anyone pushing or causing it. It was spontaneous or automatic. Context matters. For example, a ball rolling down a hill. The ball rolled by itself. Figuratively, the phrase "без помощи людской силы" is Russian and translates literally to "without the help of human strength," or more naturally, "without human assistance." The phrase "kuzov раскачивался" is Russian and literally translates to "the body of a vehicle was swaying," or "the car body was rocking." Kuzov, body, usually of a car or other vehicle, раскачивался, was swaying, rocking, or oscillating. So in context, the phrase "как от ветра" is Russian and literally translates to "as if from the wind" or "like from the wind." Its exact meaning depends on the context. It's often used figuratively to convey something happening very quickly, lightly, or almost imperceptibly, similar to how the wind passes by. For example, "Она ушла как от ветра." She left as if carried by the wind, suggesting she left very swiftly or lightly. Эти слова улетели как от ветра. These words flew away like the wind, suggesting they were forgotten or had little impact. The phrase "полы курток землекопов развивались" is Russian and can be translated literally as, open quote, "the hems or flaps of the diggers' jackets were fluttering," close quote. Breaking it down, "полы курток," the hems, flaps of the jackets, literally, skirts of the jackets, землекопов, of the diggers, or of the earth diggers, развивались, were fluttering or were waving. So the image it evokes is of people diggers moving. The phrase "тянулась, изгибаясь, узкая колея" can be translated and interpreted as follows. Тянулась, stretched, extended, ran. Изгибаясь, twisting, winding, bending. Узкая, narrow. Колея, track, groove, usually a path made by wheels on a road or in the ground. So the whole phrase literally means, open quote, a narrow track stretched, winding, bending. The phrase "рехей глядел на все это" is Russian. Broken down, рехей, a proper name, likely rekhei or rechei. Глядел, past tense of глядеть, meaning looked or was looking. На все это, at all this, or at everything here. So the full sentence translates to Reke was looking at all this, or more naturally in English, Reke looked at everything. If you want, I can The phrase «Ему хотелось стать землекопом» is Russian and translates to «and he wanted to become a digger», or «and he wanted to be a digger». And «Ему хотелось» he wanted, or literally, it was desirable to him. Stать to become, землекопом, a digger, someone who digs, e.g. a laborer who works with the earth. The Russian phrase «или, по крайней мере» translates to or, at least in English. It's used to soften a statement or suggest a minimum possibility. For example, Russian «он хороший человек» или, по крайней мере, он пытается быть хорошим. English, he's a good person, or at least he tries to be good. So it's like saying, even if the first part isn't fully true. The Russian phrase «хоть раз прокатиться с рабочими на вагонетке» literally translates to ride at least once with the workers on a minecart, or industrial trolley. The phrase «скатившись на равнину за окраиной деревни» is Russian. Breaking it down, «скатившись» literally having rolled sled down or sliding down. It's a gerund, indicating an action that happens while or before another action. На равнину, onto the plain, or onto the flat land. За окраиной деревни, beyond the outskirts of the village. So the full phrase can be translated as having slid down onto the plain beyond the outskirts of the village, or more smoothly, sliding down onto the plain beyond the village's edge, depending on context. The Russian phrase «вагонетка останавливалась» translates to the minecart or small trolley was stopping, or the minecart stopped in English. Breaking it down, vagonetka equals small rail cart, often used in mines or industrial settings. A minecart or trolley. Останавливаться, останавливалась, to stop, was stopping. Past tense, imperfective aspect, feminine neutral singular depending on context. So the sentence describes a cart in the process of stopping. The phrase «в тот же миг землекопы ловко спрыгивали» is Russian and can be translated literally as at that very moment, the mole men, or diggers, skillfully jumped down. Breaking it down, в тот же миг, at that very moment or immediately. Землекопы, literally earth diggers, can mean diggers, mole men, or people/creatures who dig. Ловко, skillfully, nimbly, dexterously. Спрыгивали, jumped down, leaped off. So the sentence describes a scene where diggers or mole-like creatures immediately and skillfully jump down somewhere. If you want, I can also give a more. The Russian phrase «вываливали землю из вагонеток на конечный пункт колеи» literally translates to dumped the soil from the carts at the end point of the track. Breaking it down, вываливали, dumped, poured out, землю, soil, earth, ground, из вагонеток, from the small carts, usually mining or construction carts. На конечный пункт колеи, at the final station point of the track rail. So it describes a process where soil is being unloaded from carts at the final stop of a rail or track system. If you want, I can also. The Russian phrase «потом», на этот раз уже подталкивая вагонетку, translates to then, this time already pushing the cart. Breaking it down, потом, then or afterwards. На этот раз, this time, уже, already. Подталкивая, pushing, present participle, like while pushing. Вагонетку, the cart or minecart, diminutive of vagon, depending on context, often used for small carts. So the Russian phrase «пускались в обратный путь вверх по склону» literally translates to set off, backtracked up the slope, or more naturally in English, started going back up the slope, or turned back and went up the slope. Breaking it down, пускались, set off, started, began, imperfective reflexive implies moving in a certain way, в обратный путь, on the way back, in the reverse direction, вверх по склону, up the slope. So the full phrase describes someone or something moving back. The phrase «и тогда Рахай думал» is Russian and translates to «and then Rahai thought», or «and then Rahai was thinking», depending on context. Breaking it down, «и» equals «and», «тогда», «then», Rahai, a proper name, Rahai, past tense, masculine singular. It's the beginning of a sentence describing what Rehai was thinking at that moment. The Russian phrase «Что раз уж нельзя прокатиться на вагонетке» can be translated roughly as «since we can't ride the little minecart», or more loosely, given that riding the cart isn't allowed. Breaking it down, «что» here functions more like since or given that, contextual connector. Rasush emphasizes inevitability, roughly, once or since it's already the case that. Nilza, not allowed or impossible. Прокатиться, to ride, or to take a ride. На вагонетке, on a small cart, often like a mine cart or amusement park cart. So the phrase is setting up a reason or condition, often followed by what they'll do instead. For example, что раз уж нельзя прокатиться на вагонетке, пойдем погуляем по парку. Since we can't ride the cart, let's go for a walk in the park. The Russian phrase «то хорошо бы ее хоть потолкать» can be translated roughly as it would be nice to at least push her a little, or it would be good to give her a little push. Breaking it down, «то» in this context emphasizes then, or it would be. «Хорошо бы», it would be good, nice, expresses a wish or suggestion. Ее, her. Хоть, at least, or even just. Потолкать, to push, imperfective, meaning to push lightly or repeatedly. Depending on context, it could be. The Russian phrase «и вот однажды под вечер» translates to «and then one evening», or «and one day», toward evening, depending on context. E equals and, вот, here, so emphasis, like so it happened. Однажды equals once, one day. Под вечер, toward evening, late in the day. It's often used to start a story or anecdote, setting a scene. The phrase «была первая декада февраля» is Russian. Breaking it down. «Была» was, passive to be. Первая, first. Dekada, literally decade. But in Russian calendar terms, it refers to a 10-day period. Fevraля, of February, genitive case. So, the whole phrase means it was the first 10-day period of February. In Russian, each month is often divided into 3 decades of 10 days each, so the first decade is February 10 to 10. If you want, I can explain why the phrase Rehei's bratishke is in Russian, but it mixes Russian with a bit of slang or informal style. Let's break it down. 1. Rehei. This isn't a standard Russian word. It could be a slang transliteration of rehe or reke, maybe a nickname, username, or a playful way of writing relax in a stylized way. In some online or youth slang, sounds are altered for style. 2. Bratishke. This is Russian for with my little brother, or more colloquially, with my bro. Ses equals with bratishke. diminutive of brat, brother, so friendly or affectionate. So overall, reches bratishke roughly translates to rechilax with my bro, or chilling with my little brother, depending on context. If you want, I can try to figure out exactly what reche means, because it might be a meme. The phrase "который был на 2 года моложе его" is Russian and translates to "who was 2 years younger than him." Breaking it down, который, who, or which, был, was, past tense of to be, на 2 года, by 2 years. Моложе, younger, его, him, or his. It's the phrase "и соседским мальчиком" is in Russian. Literally, it translates to "and with the neighbor's boy," or "and the neighbor boy," depending on context. E equals and, соседским, neighbors. Adjective, instrumental case here, often used to indicate accompaniment or relationship. Мальчиком, instrumental case. The instrumental case suggests the phrase "однолеткам брата" is in Russian and can be broken down. Однолеткам, this is the instrumental case of однолеток, which literally means 1-year-old, plant offspring, or same-aged person, depending on context. Brata, genitive case of brat, meaning brother. So literally, однолеткам брата can be translated as the same-aged 1-year-old as the brother, or my brother's same age, 1-year-old. The exact meaning depends heavily on context. For example, if talking about animals or plants, the Russian phrase "пошел на окраину деревни к вагонеткам" translates to "went to the outskirts of the village to the carts," or more literally, to the small wagons trolleys. Breaking it down, пошел went, past tense masculine singular, на окраину деревни, to the outskirts of the village, к вагонеткам, to the wagons, carts, trolleys. Dative case, indicating direction toward them. The word vagonetki usually refers to small railway carts or trolleys, often used in mines, construction, or for moving goods. The phrase smerkalis vagonetki is Russian. Let's break it down carefully. 1. Smerkalis, this is the imperfective past tense of smerkatsa, which means it was getting dark or twilight was falling. It describes the onset of evening or dusk. 2. Vagonetki, this is the plural form of vagonetka, which means small cart or mine cart. In context, it usually refers to carts used in mining, industry, or sometimes for transporting goods. So literally, it was getting dark. The mine carts. The sentence seems in The phrase "неочищенные от грязи стояли в ряд" can be translated from Russian to English as "not cleaned of dirt, they stood in a row." Breaking it down, "неочищенные от грязи," not cleaned of dirt, literally uncleaned from dirt. Стояли, stood, в ряд, in a row or in a line. It describes something, probably objects or items, that were dirty and arranged in. The Russian phrase "куда ни глянь" literally translates to "wherever you look" in English. It's an idiomatic expression used to indicate that something is everywhere or all around. For example, "куда ни глянь, повсюду деревья." Wherever you look, there are trees everywhere. "Куда ни глянь, всё в беспорядке." No matter where you look, everything is a mess. The structure "ni" here is used for emphasis, making it more like "no matter where you look," rather than just "where you look." If you want, I can break down the grammar of "куда ни глянь" so it makes perfect sense word by word. It's a neat trick in Russian. Do you want me to do that? The Russian sentence "никого из землекопов не было видно" translates literally to, open quote, "none of the diggers could be seen," or more naturally in English, "no diggers were visible." Close quote, breaking it down, никого, nobody or no one, accusative form of никто. Is, from, землекопов, diggers, genitive plural of kop. Не было видно was not visible, could not be seen. So the sentence simply says that there weren't any diggers in sight. If you want, I can also explain the nuance of не было видно, which is a very common Russian construction. Do you want me to? The Russian sentence "Тогда дети с опаской подтолкнули крайнюю вагонетку" translates to English as "Then the children cautiously pushed the outermost cart." Breaking it down. Тогда, then, at that time. Дети, children. Saske, cautiously, warily, with caution. Подтолкнули, pushed, slightly or partially. Крайнюю, the outermost, the last. Feminine form, agreeing with вагонетку. Вагонетку, cart, small wagon. The sentence conveys that the children were. The Russian phrase «под действием толчка колеса вагонетки пришли в движение» can be translated literally as "Under the action of the push of the wheel, the cart came into motion." A smoother, more natural English version would be "The cart started moving due to the push of the wheel." Под действием, under the influence of, due to, by the action of. Толчка колеса, a push of the wheel, вагонетки, of the small cart. Trolley, пришли в движение, came into motion, started moving. If you want, I can also explain the physics context this sentence might refer to. It sounds like it's from a mechanics textbook. Do you want me to do that? The sentence "От их стука рехей похолодел" is in Russian. Let's break it down carefully. От их стука literally, from their knocking, or from their thump beat. Depending on context, it could refer to knocking, tapping, pounding, or even footsteps. Rechei, a proper name, likely rehai. Похолодел literally became cold, but in this context it usually means felt a chill or grew cold with fear, anxiety. So the full sentence can be translated as Rehai felt a chill from their knocking. Or more naturally in English, Rehai grew cold at the sound of their knocking. It conveys a sense of fear, dread, or shock caused by the noise. If you want, I can also explain the emotional nuance of похолодел here, which is a very typical. The phrase "но когда стук повторился" is Russian and translates to "but when the knock repeated" or "but when the knocking happened again." No, but, когда, when, стук knock, like knocking on a door, повторился, repeated, happened again. It sounds like a line from a story or a. The Russian phrase "он не испугался" translates to "he was not afraid" or "he didn't get scared" in English. Breaking it down, he не was not. Испугался, got scared, was frightened. Past tense, masculine singular. So it's talking about a male subject in the past who did not feel fear. If you want, I can explain the subtle difference between не испугался and other ways of saying he wasn't afraid in Russian. It's a bit nuanced. Do you want me? The Russian sentence. Под эти звуки, подталкиваемая тремя парами рук, вагонетка двинулась вверх по колее can be translated into English as to these sounds, the cart pushed 3 pairs of hands started moving up along the track. Breaking it down. Под эти звуки, to these sounds, or accompanied by these sounds. Подталкиваемая тремя парами рук, pushed by 3 pairs of hands. Вагонетка, or minecart, depending on context. Двинулась вверх по колее, moved up along the track. It's describing a cart being pushed along a track, synchronized with some sounds. If you want, I can also make a more natural, literary English version that captures the flow. The sentence «Между тем через десяток кен колея круче пошла в гору» is a bit unusual and seems stylistically fragmented, possibly from a literary or colloquial context. Let's break it down. 1. Между тем, meanwhile, or in the meantime. 2. Через десяток кен, literally, after a dozen ken. Here, десяток was a dozen, but ken is unclear. It could be a transliteration of a foreign word, a unit, or slang. Without context, it's hard to translate precisely. 3. Kolea, track or rut, like a groove or path, often in a road or trail. 4. Kruchipaslav Goru, went uphill more steeply, or steepened uphill. So a literal rendering might be, meanwhile, after a dozen ken, the track steepened uphill. It seems to describe a path or road that becomes steeper after some distance. But the meaning of ken is key. Without context, it could be a unit of distance, a vehicle. The phrase "Skolka ani ni talkali" is Russian and can be translated roughly as no matter how much they pushed, or however much they pushed. Let's break it down. Skolka, how much, how many. Ani they. Ni's context emphasizes no matter or however. Tolkali, pushed, past tense, plural fricative. So it conveys the idea that despite all their efforts pushing something, the result didn't change. If you want, the Russian phrase "Vagonetka не поддавалась и не трогалась с места" translates roughly to the minecart wouldn't give way and didn't move from its place. Breaking it down. Vagonetka, a small cart or minecart, often used in mines or industrial settings. Не поддавалась, literally, did not yield, did not give way, meaning it was resistant or stuck. Не трогалась с места, did not move from its spot, meaning it stayed in place despite attempts to move it. So the whole sentence describes a cart that is the Russian sentence. Иногда же вместе с вагонеткой они сами откатывались назад. Translates to English as, sometimes along with the cart, they would roll back on their own. Breaking it down. Иногда, sometimes. Же, if is indeed or actually. Вместе с вагонеткой, together with the cart, along with the cart, они сами откатывались назад. They themselves would roll back. Move back on their own. So the sentence is describing a situation where something, likely people or objects, would act. The phrase "Rechei Reshil" is in Russian. Let's break it down carefully. Rechei, this appears to be a proper name, likely Rekhei or Rekhei in English transliteration. It's not a common Russian word, it's almost certainly a person's name. Reshil, this is a past tense verb, masculine singular, from reshit, which means to decide or to resolve. So Rechei Reshil literally means Rekhei decided. It's the start of a sentence, so it likely continues with what he decided. If you want, I can also. The Russian phrase "shtolkать больше не надо" literally translates to that which no longer needs to be pushed. Contextually, it usually implies something has already been set in motion or completed, so further effort isn't necessary. It can also be figurative, like don't bother arguing pushing it anymore, or we've done enough with this. A smoother, natural English rendering could be no need to push it anymore. That's taken care of now. Stop pushing it. It's done. If you want, I can explain. The Russian phrase "и сделал знак младшим мальчикам" translates literally to and made a sign to the younger boys. Breaking it down. И and сделал, made or did. Znak, sign, could mean a gesture, signal, or symbol. Mladшим мальчикам, to the younger boys. Context matters. Znak often implies a hand gesture or signal, so in a story, it might mean the person gestured to the younger boys in some way. If you want, I can explain possible nuances of сделал. The Russian phrase "ну поехали" literally translates to well, let's go, or here we go in English. Nu, well, used to get things started or draw attention. Поехали, literally, let's go, from the verb ехать, to go, drive, ride. It's famously known as Yuri Gagarin's first words in space in 1961, said right at the launch of Vostok 1. In modern Russian, it's often used casually to mean let's get started, or here we go in everyday situations.